Hello, welcome back to the ASCO Journal of Oncology Practice podcast. This is Dr. Nathan Pinnell, medical oncologist at the Cleveland Clinic and consultant editor for the journal. I think many people today tend to take for granted the vast and immediately accessible wealth of information on the internet for just about any topic. I know as soon as I am curious about a topic that I know I don't know enough about, I reach for my smartphone or head for the computer, and I'm sure many patients do the exact same thing. But when someone is diagnosed with a life-threatening illness, such as advanced cancer, what role does the internet play in patient education about the prognosis and treatment options? And how useful and accurate is that information? Today, I'm joined by Dr. Thomas Smith to discuss his paper, Getting Helpful Information from the Internet About Prognosis with Advanced Cancer, scheduled to be published in the JOP in June 2015. Dr. Smith is a professor of oncology at the Johns Hopkins Hospital, where he's also the Harry J. Duffy Family Professor of Palliative Medicine and Director of the Palliative Medicine Service. Dr. Smith, thank you for joining me.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to talk with you this morning.
So I was immediately interested when I saw this paper because I think it's a really neat idea that you and a medical student basically sat down and decided to pretend to be a cancer patient. So take me through the backstory. Where did this idea come from?
Well, Nathan, I've been interested in honest, compassionate information for a long time because I think that's what we pride ourselves on, among other skills, as oncologists. But I noted that sometimes for me and for a lot of my colleagues, it's really difficult sometimes to sit down with people and tell them what's going on and what they are likely to expect. And I know we can do this. We did a pilot trial with 27 consecutive really seriously ill patients of giving them their prognosis. In most cases, it was less than 2 months, and we printed that out much like Adjuvant Online does, and then gave them some transition helps to, okay, if the prognosis is bad, what should I do now? And believe it or not, nobody got depressed, nobody got anxious, and we were measuring their hope, and their hope actually increased. And all the data shows that knowing what is likely to happen to you doesn't worsen depression, anxiety, or mood. It's really the exact opposite. It lets people plan, and it lets their families plan. We also know that most print ads for cancer centers concentrate on cure, hope, a lot of hype, come here for the latest and greatest, or my favorite, we will never give up on you. These are from a lot of cancer centers that don't actually have active palliative care, when in fact palliative care along with oncology is associated with longer and better survival in at least 5 studies now. So we wanted to know if the average 62-year-old patient with lung cancer, pancreas cancer, brain tumor could find out what would happen to them on trusted websites. So we started with the NCI's cancer.gov, all the places I've been sending people for years, ASCO's cancer.net, the American Cancer Society website, UpToDate, which has increasingly good patient information, and then the most frequently used disease-specific ones, like one for lung cancer, the most commonly used pancreas cancer ones, the most commonly used brain tumor ones. So Ivan Chick, who's now a second-year medical student at Hawaii, and I spent the summer surfing the web, not unfortunately surfing in Hawaii, but surfing the web, combing for information, just like our patients do.
No, that's fascinating, and I think you need to design a follow-up study where you actually do the surfing in Hawaii as part of the part of the plan. And so, you know, I found this very interesting because it hadn't really occurred to me. I knew, of course, the patients go out and probably read about these things, and I, in fact, warn them of some of the numbers that they're going to see if they go and search, because I know, especially for my lung cancer patients who are, you know, frequently in their 70s and 80s, it's more their children and grandchildren who are going and searching for these things. But it hadn't really occurred to me that this might be a primary site where they would get that information. So I tend to think that it's my job as an oncologist to explain this and worry less about what they might find on the internet. So do you think it's important that patients have an available resource to find this outside of their oncologist?
I think it's important that patients have enough resources to get real and accurate information. Ideally, the oncologist would sit down with somebody at the beginning and then at every transition site and ask some questions that I'm actually having made into a temporary tattoo that I can have on my left volar forearm. And the first one is, how do you like to get medical information? Are you the sort of person who likes to have all the numbers, and can I be honest with you? And number 2 is, what's your understanding of your situation? That will get you right to how much they actually understand and can say back to you. Number 3, what's important to you? Number 4, what are you hoping for? And number 5, what do you think about if you were to get sicker? Have you thought about an advance directive or a living will? Because we know even at Mass General, which is a very good place to get your cancer care for lung cancer, only 15% of cancer patients with less than a year to live have any sort of advance directive discussion documented in their chart. So I think even the best oncologist communicator needs some backup. And the data really show that most of us aren't doing this in a way that's terribly effective, at least based on what our patients tell us. In the CanCor's study, only 17% of patients with colorectal or lung cancer stage 4 could estimate their prognosis correctly, that only 17% could check that the average person will live less than two years with lung cancer and less than 5 years with colorectal cancer. And from the same CanCor study, we know that somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of patients overestimate the effect of chemotherapy, marking off on a telephone survey that, yes, it could cure me, when in fact it couldn't.
No, I think we all recognize this is an incredibly important topic, especially as we're getting, thankfully, increasing recognition that too many patients are getting poor quality care at the end of their life. They're getting treated very soon before they die. They're not getting referred to hospice early enough, and we know that those things are very beneficial. One thing I just wanted to ask you about, since I happen to have the expert on the podcast here, I've read these studies about patients who are asked about their understanding of cancer, and when they say, yes, this chemotherapy can cure me, this radiation can cure me, how rigorous are they determining whether the patients truly don't understand the data or whether they're really just thinking individually of themselves? Yes, they actually, if you dug deeper, I know my doctor told me I'm incurable and that this chemotherapy is just going to prolong my life, but I think I'm going to be cured by this.
Well, I think part of that is the indomitable nature of human hope, and it's a wonderful thing. I mean, that's why people go to Pimlico and bet money on the horses. That's why people buy lottery tickets. And for some people, it's just really hard when a telephone interviewer calls you up for the 4th time that year to say, I don't think I'm going to live much longer than 6 months or so. That said, I don't think we do a great job. I would bet 100% or close to 100% of us tell people this disease can't be cured as of 2015. I mean, that's what I tell people. Mm-hmm. And we're trying to get 3 months here, 6 months there, try to get you as much time as possible. I think if you put an anthropology student in an oncologist's office and then look at what happens after that, most of us never bring it up explicitly again. And I would argue that telling somebody at the front with advanced lung cancer, this disease can't be cured, when they're still reeling with, doctor, did you just say I had lung cancer? And they're not going to really understand anything. It's no wonder that people don't get it. We also know that people overestimate their prognosis by 100%, and they feel sorry for the other person, but they themselves are going to do better. But to have only 17% of people being able to say with some accuracy what their prognosis is means that we're not doing our job effectively. And I think the way to do that most simply is at every single transition point. So when somebody with lung cancer progresses after a good remission lasting 3 months, but they have progressive disease, that's a time to sit down again and ask, what's your understanding of your situation? Because the situation has changed. Mm-hmm. That person is facing second-line chemotherapy. Second-line chemotherapy gives probably 3 months benefit in terms of survival, equal quality of life. So it's worth doing, but the future is pretty predictable. we should sit down and say, what's your understanding of your situation now? Explain it in reasonable terms. Well, the average person, not everybody's average, but the average person will live 4 to 6 to 8 months. And we want to get you as much time as possible, but it's also time to start doing some advanced care planning.
One of the difficult problems is determining when's the best time to actually have this conversation. Because, as you mentioned, we all are good about telling people when we first meet them, and I know that's true for me. I always make sure that patients hear that their cancer isn't curable and that, what the goals of our care are really just to prolong their life or to help their symptoms. And then I do think I personally do a pretty good job during the transition points of when the scans look bad and we need to talk about something else, about readdressing that topic. But I wonder if that almost is the same situation as the first time when they were first diagnosed, because suddenly they have the shock that the treatment's not working, and now we're suddenly starting to bring up that idea that maybe you should start thinking about the end of life and whatnot. And do you think that's the best time to address this? I always wondered if one of the benefits from Jennifer Temmel's integrated palliative medicine and lung cancer study, and why there was such an improvement in advanced directives and less aggressive care at the end of life, was simply because there was a follow-up. So they saw the oncologist, they saw everyone, and they talked about the treatment, but then a month later they met with the palliative medicine specialist to separately have the time to discuss these things. Not necessarily at a crisis point, but maybe at a point where actually they were hopeful and looking forward to their treatment.
Well, I think that's exactly right. And Jennifer's study was the first to show in lung cancer patients improved survival, as well as half the rate of depression and less anxiety and better mood and better quality of life and better symptom management. But Marie Bakitis just published in Journal of Clinical Oncology early versus late palliative care for cancer patients, and found the same survival benefit, almost a 6-month survival benefit. And pretty soon in JCO, Betty Farrell from the City of Hope will show a very similar study design with improved survival, and there are others pending and that are published. There are now 4 or 5 cancer studies showing improved survival, and others pending in other diseases that will show improved survival as well. So it's not like the palliative care people are somehow inhibiting people from living longer. In fact, it's better. Mm-hmm. But you're right, you can't do this in a 15-minute office visit. And if you say you're going to be doing palliative care, you really need to do palliative care. And that's asking, what's your understanding of your situation? People want to know the name, the prognosis. 80% of patients want to know the prognosis, even if it's bad or upsetting news. What are the symptoms? What's going to happen to me? What's its natural course? And what caused it, so that I can tell my family if it's something genetic. If you're doing palliative care, you need to do a spiritual assessment. Just ask, is religion or spirituality important to you? If you're doing palliative care, you need to do a multidimensional symptom assessment. Are you bothered by pain? Are you bothered by fatigue? Are you bothered by tiredness? Are you bothered by depression? Are you bothered by anxiety, constipation, nausea, diarrhea? That works so much better than just asking, how are you? And you need to, at every visit, or at least once a month, if you're doing palliative care, we ask, what's your understanding of your situation?
And it sounds like for places who have access to established palliative care programs, such as yourself, and it's true here at the Cleveland Clinic as well, this is a wonderful resource. But do you think the online resources in some way can serve this goal for places where there isn't established palliative care available?
They can be very helpful by giving people information. So I just looked on cancer.net, so the NCI's, National Cancer Institute's website. I've got it here in front of me up on the screen. And it talks about lung cancer, and it says, for most patients with non-small cell lung cancer, current treatments do not cure the cancer. And then it goes on to say, well, take part in some clinical trial. That doesn't help the average person with lung cancer know that there's about a 50-50 chance that they're going to die in the first year, and that the average person lives somewhere between 10 to 12 months if they're really well. If they're really poor performance status because of the cancer, it's going to be much shorter than that. So people don't get as much information. Mm-hmm. You zip over to the cancer.net, so our professional societies editorial board, they made major strides in improving this website, and it says the 1-year survival rate is a percentage of people who survive at least 1 year. For all people with lung cancer, the 1-year survival rate is 44%. The 5-year survival rate is 17%. That's helpful, but it would also be helpful to say, for the average person, most people will live 10 to 12 months with this disease.
Mm-hmm.
It can be longer, but it can also be shorter. If you're having a lot of symptoms from the cancer, it's likely to be shorter. Please discuss these results with your doctor so you can plan the most effective use of your time. And if you go to other websites, most don't have any useful information. We looked at websites for each of the 10 most common cancers, so we just took the American Cancer Society's top 10 list for cancers that were most likely to cause death, and only 8% of websites had any information about median or most common survival. Some, like the National Cancer Institutes, don't really mention it at all. And some had, well, the 5-year survival rate is 17%. That's not really helpful to your average person. And yet some do. So like Up to Date, for metastatic breast cancer that has progressed beyond endocrine therapy, it says the average person will live 18 to 24 months. So it's possible to do this without turning people off. It's possible to do it without people going home and shooting themselves. What it does is it gives some backup to the oncologist who says, this is a serious disease. We're going to get you as much decent quality time as possible, but there are some other things that you should be doing at the same time, because for most people it's a predictable end of life.
And I'm looking at the page from cancer.net here, and although it does mention things such as, if the cancer has spread to a distant part of the body, the 5-year survival rate is 4%. I agree. I don't see anything about the average amount of time that someone lives. But even after it does this, it's very interesting. The last paragraph makes a point of saying these statistics should not be taken as a death sentence. It is important to remember that statistics do not apply to an individual person, and no doctor can tell a person how long he or she will live with lung cancer. It's almost as if they're really afraid to give this kind of information out in this setting. And I like what you said about putting something in here about, if you want to know more about this, make sure you have this discussion with your doctor, because it does seem as though this is critical information for people to be able to plan.
Correct. And that plan is the key word here. So how many times have our hospice colleagues said, well, the patient said to me, if I'd just known that the chance of 3rd or 4th line chemotherapy in lung cancer, the chance that it was going to help me was so small, and Dad got so sick, I would have done things so much differently. So now he hasn't had a chance to go back to the hometown where he was. He hasn't had a chance to, make up with his estranged brother who lives in L.A. He didn't check in with the rabbi or the priest just to make sure that those things, we have a whole bunch of financial issues that we need to settle, and now he's in the ICU on a ventilator and he can't talk to us. Those are the things we want to prevent.
So how can these websites do a better job than what they're doing? So you mentioned that some of them, like Up to Date, are actually getting better, but it sounds like you have some ideas for what can be put into these websites, or do we need another central place that focuses on these topics?
Well, we have a small grant from the California Healthcare Foundation to start out with these 10 websites, and we're starting with lung cancer, to basically update them to make them look more like metastatic online, if you will. So the average person with lung cancer lives 10 to 12 months. Parentheses, it stayed stubbornly about the same for the past 5 to 8 years, close parentheses, but we won't put that in there. And then we'll show a bar graph of here's how many people will be alive at 1 year, and here's how many people will be dead. And just like I do with Adjuvant Online, I'll say I'd like to keep you in the green bar. I want to keep you alive and going for as long as possible, but I know this is a serious disease. And then at the bottom, there'll be transition helps, what, again, I call the Johns Hopkins checklist. Do you have a will? Do you have a living will or advanced medical directive? Do you have a durable power of medical attorney, someone who can speak for you? Have you discussed your wishes about things like CPR and resuscitation with that person? Any family issues, any spiritual issues, any financial issues? And let's start talking about legacy, how you want to be remembered. And I've done that with hundreds of patients, and my colleagues who've adopted this have done this with thousands of patients, and it works really well. It leads you right down through the most important parts that people have to face. And I'll ask people, do you want to get hospice involved? And I'll set up this hospice information visit when I think people have about 6 months to live. I know for people who haven't tried it, just try it once with a hospice company that you like and you trust, and believe me, it'll make life so much easier for you. You won't go back to waiting till they've been failed by fourth-line chemo. You write this all down, give it to them. They can share it with their family. I know if I say there's a 50% chance that they'll be dead in a year, they're probably going to reduce that to 25% chance, but at least we mention it. They can share it with their family, and they can start thinking, this is a pretty serious illness. Maybe it's time to make some plans. Not going to work for everybody, but it does work for the great, great majority of people. And I think it's possible for cancer.net and cancer.gov, when they have their every 3-month advisory board meetings, just like they update with new therapies, which they do, they update with new therapies, giving the response rates. Why not put in the disease-free survival and the overall survival in figures that people can understand?
Yeah, I really like the idea of being able to use the technology and the online resources to be able to improve this, hopefully everywhere, and not just where experts such as yourself are able to help out and provide the service. Is there anything else you want to make sure that you get across about your paper? Any kind of overarching message?
I think what our paper shows is a snapshot as of last summer. It shows the deficiencies, but it also shows some hopeful spots where, with just a small amount of information, we can improve them. So that when somebody goes to a pancreas cancer website or a ASCO or NCI's website or ACS's are up to date, they can actually find out what's most likely to happen to them so they can plan. For the person who simply can't accept that medical science can't fix them, it's not going to change their thinking whatsoever. For the person who's a little bit depressed and now is depressed over having a disease, all the data shows that having such information is actually good, doesn't make people more depressed, doesn't make people more anxious, doesn't make them give up hope. It will help that person plan. And you hope that patients will bring these fact sheets into your office and say, what this says is it's pretty serious, and I should be thinking about these other steps like a will, a living will, a durable power of medical attorney. That's what I would like to see just as much as somebody bringing in 14 different phase 1 trials and asking me to help them choose what's the best phase 1 trial for them.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Smith, for joining me today to talk about your paper and this obviously incredibly important topic.
Oh, you're welcome, and I hope Cleveland has warmed up out there. I just checked the Port Clinton fishing forecast for walleyes, and it sounds like it's been a very turbulent weather, sort of a typical Northeast Ohio spring.
It was snowing 3 weeks ago, and on Friday it was 89 degrees, which apparently is a 126-year record for how hot it was. So I would call this a pretty typical Cleveland spring. I also want to thank the listeners who joined us today for this podcast. The full text of Dr. Smith's paper will be available at jop.ascopubs.org under early release in June 2015. Don't forget, you can also read the JOP and access these podcasts on your smartphone or tablet with the ASCO Journal's mobile app, available at the iTunes Store and Google Play. This is Dr. Nathan Pinnell for the Journal of Oncology Practice, signing off. Thanks for listening.